Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Spar&Brawl. Hope you're having a decent day. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Sam. And in the past few weeks or even month, the mass atrocities and the crimes and everything committed and the mistreatment of Indigenous Canadians are back at the forefront of Canadian news. So let's look at the recent developments, and then we're going to talk a little about the history of Canadian residential schools, which are the boarding schools that Native Canadians, Indigenous Canadians were forced to go for about 100 years. So let's first get into the news, the more recent news. So unmarked graves containing hundreds of bodies have been found recently. So about a week ago, probably 10 days now, using ground penetrating radars, they found the remains of 751 people on the grounds of a residential school for Indigenous children. In late May, they had used the same technology, and somewhere else in Canada, they had found the remains of 215 bodies in unmarked graves. And just this Thursday, they found another set of 200 people, 200 bodies on the grounds of a former residential school. So another one. So all of this had even kind of led to some people asking for Canada Day, which was this past Thursday, to be canceled. And some cities have gone as far, even actually did cancel Canada Day. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about these residential schools. So Canada passed the Indian Act in 1876, and this act defined how the government interacts with all the different First Nation bands in Canada. Then in 1894, they added this amendment to it, which made school attendance compulsory for children, for Indigenous children between the age of 7 and 16. So sorry, attendance to typically to these boarding schools compulsory. So I believe that the kid could go to another school, but usually there were no other Canadian schools approved by the government near where they lived. So they were taken to these boarding schools. And at the same time, there was a push to really for Indigenous kids to not go to the day schools and rather to go to the boarding schools, because they would say that when they go to day schools, then they go back home and they're again assimilated in their own culture. And the best way to really make sure that they get away from their own cultures to take them to these schools. So from what I understand, some kids would go years without seeing their parents. Some would be for a year or so. And parents weren't even really allowed to come and visit their kids. If they were able to get there, they had to come kind of accompanied by some people, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, the whole point was to really separate the kids from their Indigenous background. And so in 2008, the then conservative prime minister, I'm not sure what really brought this about, but Stephen Harper, he apologized for residential schools, and this started the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So this commission was launched, and this commission went and interviewed thousands of people who were still alive and who went to these schools. And some of their main findings were that 150,000 Indigenous children most likely attended these schools during those 100 years or so. At the very least, 3,200 of them died, but now others are saying these figures are probably near 5, 6, or 7, or 10,000. And the final conclusion of this commission was that the removal of children from the influence of their own culture with the intent of assimilating them into the dominant Canadian culture amounted to cultural genocide. And just a little small overview of what the situation of Indigenous Canadians are right now. So for instance, Indigenous Canadians make up 20% of Canada's imprisoned population, although they're just 5% of the Canadian population. And almost half of all children aged 14 and under in foster care are Aboriginal children. So that's pretty much an overview of the latest. And most of these children, they believe they died because, there's some could have been due to sexual abuse and also just to harsh beatings. But also, I'm guessing when diseases started to spread, they were kept confined in these schools and areas. So I'm sure different kinds of diseases, tuberculosis and all this, would become rampant every now and then. But yeah, Sam, that's just kind of overview. I don't know if there's anything you want to add or any questions. And just kind of the question I had for you when reading these kind of things comes to my mind is that sometimes we take too slightly the impact of the past on like a person, a group, or a people, you know, let's say like a certain social class, if they were treated in a certain way for 50, 100, or even more years, it's going to have impacts, even if you change things for generations to come. But yeah, I don't know if anything you want to add there, or what do you make of that?
Or I definitely agree with your sentiment, and I also agree that the actions that were taken place uh, against the Indigenous people of Canada, they were horrible. I would say that I was looking, just this is, I mean, obviously they're horrible, barbaric, whatever you want to call them. But I was reading in most of the news stories that they found children, but then in the notes you sent me, it said people. I was wondering, is there like a breakdown, or is there
that's the
like,
thing.
are they all children, or?
Yeah, I don't think they've reached that level of like analysis to know. So actually, for one of them, they actually wrote that, but yeah, that they hadn't done the proper kinds of analysis to know. So most like, I mean, these
Yet
graves
there is
were
a still.
found on the sites of these schools. So most likely a lot of them are children. But like I said, with disease and other stuff, it's very likely that, you know, staff also got the same kind of disease.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
was just because of the reports I was wondering. But I would say that, to be fair, not to be fair at all, sorry,
Mm.
I just had this came to my mind because I was looking at the dates of these events that were happening, and this is like largely the same process that happens in every country with the start of basically the national projects.
Mm-hmm.
You see the compulsorification of the schools, and then the tribal groups that are nomadic. Usually, I don't know about First Nation.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were all nomadic or not. But like, for example, in Iran, in like about 20 years after, I think, these events, you have a very similar thing that, you know, tribes are forced into like settlements. Children are forced to attend the schools that, for example, the families don't approve. Conscription comes into effect, which is that one, for example, in Iran was a massive one. So, and so I think it's a process you see everywhere. And I just wonder if the same was happening with the like lower classes that were not indigenous people, were of white ethnicity or maybe immigrant ethnicity or something. So I wonder if the same was happening with them. And then, you know, I just hate the fact that this word genocide is thrown around, and now they're coming up with this ecocide and all that. It's just, I think that all of this is cheapening the, like, we can talk about these things about in a serious and, in my view, a bit less emotional fashion. Not to undermine your point about the fact that these things still have effects today that are felt. But I just don't like this. Yeah, I don't like this
But to be
emotional way
fair,
that it's being covered.
in the report, they called it cultural genocide. So not genocide, and cultural genocide, because the whole point was for kids to completely forget their own mother tongue and their own
You could
culture.
have
They
no, no,
weren't
but
allowed. They were trying to pretty much beat the past out of them, you know, to make
sure, but
people who are different.
that's usually
Yeah.
like a states. They do that with all, like same France did it with French language and patios, local French variants. English did the same.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not saying. I just, you could have said destruction of a beautiful
No, or just destruction of their
and
culture. I
ancient,
mean,
sorry,
you don't even
yeah,
have
yeah.
to say those things. It's
No, you could have written, yeah, destruction of a culture that is, yeah, whatever, very important. But yeah, culture genocide, I don't know. I hate that type of thing, that type of language, because I think that type of language puts people off that could really easily see this as like, now people are going to say, oh, you know, I do sometimes, seriously, like when I read these articles that put it in that way. But it's still, what a horrible fucking crime. Hope it never happens again. And I hope education is compulsory everywhere. Actually, I'm very much for compulsory education funded by a state, and I hate locally and family organized charter schools and that type of shit. But I hope those schools are, nice Montessori system of education rather than beating people and
Yeah.
confining them and
And
like that
I
type of
just
thing.
wanted to add a few things to your point actually before
Mm.
about how these things usually start when you're trying to put a country together. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, this Indian Act came together when they started to create the Dominion of Canada, which was putting all these different colonies together. And I guess, and then you said, so maybe they sent like, other kids from other backgrounds were also, forced to pick up the Canadian culture. But I guess the people who were
So,
migrating and who were coming, so these schools were ran by the Catholic Church, right? So during that time, the people who had come to Canada, who had colonized Canada, were people from who formed this dominant culture. So English and French people who were Christian
no,
and
yeah,
Catholic. So for them, it was like the normal thing, but then it was imposed on these people. And the extra thing is that they forced them to go to these boarding schools, right? Rather than exactly, let's say like a day school that's part of the government. There's one way that you're teaching everyone, but then
or boarding a school with some fucking good regulations
yeah.
and
But
like,
I mean, the whole point
they
of the
have to have a
boarding
room
school,
of their own.
yeah.
Yeah, no, but wait, my point about the thing was that Catholics, for example, did that all over the world, including in Europe, to white people, to
Yeah.
Protestants. But nobody talks about, when they talk about that, which is an evil, awful act, nobody says it was a part of the actions of a cultural genocide against the Protestants. I just think it's a, I just why okay, it's just, maybe it's just I don't like hyperbole.
No, but you're right there.
Hyperbole.
You're right there.
But
But I guess
but
the
but I
juxtaposition, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, but I would say, in case of obviously Indigenous people of Canada and Americas in general, it was one of the most extreme cases. I don't want to cheapen like that. It was one of the most extreme cases. But yeah, exactly. If, like, I don't know if it was, I just like to know if it was, that's why I wanted to know if they did it with poorer people as well, because I wanted to see if it was, how much of it was racially based crime. Not that it mattered, like, just as interest, it's as a sort of, it's interest to me, how much of it was racially motivated, how much of it was religiously motivated, how much of it was like, we are making a nation and we have to all, like, it's just a breakdown would be interesting, I
I
think.
think all of the below in a way, but I think you can safely say that here it was purely racial because these residential schools were only for Indigenous kids, as far as I
Oh,
understand. And it was
uh,
within the Indian Act, which was, of course, I mentioned the Indian Act was
oh yeah,
specifically set up for the how to
Indian
how
people,
to work
yeah.
with Indian, and the amendments were made to the Indian Act, which made attendance to these schools compulsory. So even if there were other ways of trying to, assimilate other people, I think it was done separately. And at the same time, during this period, they were very vocal of the fact that Europeans believed that their culture was far superior to the indigenous people. So, in their
Yeah,
minds,
yeah.
they're doing them a
But
huge favor.
sure. But yeah, exactly. And that's the thing though, but that's different from like racially motivated crime.
But I
That's more
mean,
like
yeah,
that's more of a elitism and bigotry than
yeah.
racism. But but I would say, yeah, exactly, interesting, very interesting. But see, like, culture of many cities around the world just gets assimilated into
Mhm.
the capital's culture and gets completely destroyed. Korea is an interesting recent example for that. But so yeah, but very sad,
Yeah,
very, very
no, for
awful
sure.
story.
So I mean, pretty much
So
right now, so
is
far, they
there,
found 1,000 bodies so far, just in the past few weeks.
in the US, because I don't know about this
Yeah.
in Canada, is there a debate about uh, some kind of a
No, it's
reparations,
actually,
the money that sort of, as
yeah.
a sort of a,
Since you said that's interesting, I just tried to look up very quickly. I think in the American context, they actually still have American Indian boarding schools that actually exist, whereas in Canada, they closed it, the last one in
what, in
96 or
America
97.
it's still going on.
Apparently there are still schools, yes, that
I'm sure
kids
there
go
exists.
specifically, but I mean they're a bit different. But yeah, I couldn't find anything that really, I think it was managed and ran a bit differently, like the American Indian boarding schools there
No,
than the
no,
way it was.
but is there any debate about paying people who have been wronged,
Well, in
paying their
Canada, apparently,
descendants?
in the US, I don't know, but in Canada, yes, apparently $3 billion have already been paid off.
Oh, in America, there is a major debate about the,
Yeah.
black
No,
people who are descendant of slaves, but I don't think they get any. But wow,
yeah.
so Canada has
But
paid
this is
some
much more
money.
recent. But because check this out though. So these people who did the commission, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there are 70,000 students who are still alive. And out of those 70,000, 32,000 sexual or serious sexual assault cases have already been resolved, and another 6,000. So, I mean, 30,000 something people have already received, I'm guessing, some kind of compensation, because these schools, they started very late 20th and 19th century. So yeah, so I mean, it's even in a way more recent than slavery in the US. It kind of the same time. I mean, they pretty much went on all of the 20th century. But yeah,
No,
that's
fucking hell. That's not. But it's kind of. I just reminded me of, because this week we just had the story about Bill Cosby getting out as well, and yeah, Jesus, yeah, interesting. So
yeah.
it seems that during the last 200 years, sexual assault has not really been dealt with in any shape or form.
No, but yeah, that's about it. That's a huge news out of Canada right now.
Volume of crime just
yeah. Although in Canada it's kind of getting trumped right now by also the weather things, like this entire village in British Columbia by weather and fire. Like Western Canada is like half on fire right now, apparently, from what I understand.
Oh,
but anyway,
yeah.
that's another
Sorry,
story.
yeah.
This entire village that had 1,000 homes has apparently in British Columbia completely burned down, like it's gone. But yeah, maybe a story for next week.
Yeah, just the caveat. We're gonna do a video about this one day, but I never understood why in North America, and to a lesser extent in the UK, their homes don't seem to be built to withstand much. I'm just saying, but yeah, that seems to be like they make homes out of wood and plastic stuff. And yeah, I don't, it's just, yeah, I was always surprised looking at the houses, and then they're surprised when, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, I guess these are near forest and stuff too. So maybe you kind of always build houses like this. And I guess because the weather is warmer now, there are these bigger fires now. But anyway,
interesting.
So thank you for watching, people. Please let us know if we missed anything, if I misrepresented anything. Please leave them in the comment section below and we'll make sure to get to them. But if not, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video. Thank you.